Welcome to the University of Southern California Institute of Armenian Studies. This is the third week of our conversations about Armenia and Azerbaijan at war. During the first week, as we were speaking with scholars and specialists on the ground, there were negotiations going on in Moscow for a ceasefire, and the ceasefire was declared, but it didn't hold. During the second week, as we were speaking about the roles and the perceived roles of Russia and Turkey in this conflict, there was extraordinary shelling on Stepanakert even as we began to speak. This is the third week, and our conversation today is about the other front in this war, the Armenia front. And again, as we are planning to speak to seemingly contradictory things are happening. In Washington, D.C., the foreign ministers of Armenia and Azerbaijan are meeting with State Department officials, including Secretary of State Pompeo. At the same time, the shelling on the ground in Karabakh, especially in Stepanakert, is reported as being the heaviest in 2 weeks. And I can't help but remark on the irony of the situation as we have gathered some very special people, all of whom are on the ground in Armenia today, except Emil Sanamyan, who's in Washington and I'm in Los Angeles. But even as we're trying to carry on a rational conversation about what is happening, why it's happening, trying to understand the circumstances, trying to understand both sides, and trying to find a way to peace. Even as we're trying to do all of this, it just seems as if we can't not remark on the irony or the tragedy of a situation where if the military confrontation that Azerbaijan began almost a month ago was for the purpose of bringing Armenians to the negotiating table quickly, immediately, and with maximal gain, even if that was the situation, that the intensity and the persistence and the extreme violence and disparity of this conflict, the way it's working out with Turkey's support of Azerbaijan and with the participation of mercenaries from the Middle East, the way it's working out, the least favorable solution that Armenians would be willing to go for, the absolute least, the least desirable, now seems impossible. It's an observation, it's a personal observation, but I think it has to be said in the context of both what is happening on the ground this minute as we here try to speak to three guests. Our first guest today is the Marzbet, the governor of TAVUSH, the northeastern region, province of Armenia. Remember, this is a series, a conversation that we truly intended to begin after the fighting, the late July, early August, in the TAVUSH region, directly between Armenia and Azerbaijan on that border. Our second guest, the second segment of this conversation, with the participation of Emil Sanamyan, who's been with us throughout this series. We'll be speaking with Professor Jenny Paturyan, who's a political scientist who teaches at the American University of Armenia. In the third segment, Emil and I will speak with Hrant Mikaelian, who is an analyst with the Caucasus Institute in Yerevan. So we will begin with our first guest, the governor of TAVUSH, the province that has really a teeny border with Georgia and a very large border with Azerbaijan. Mr. Hayk Chobanyan has been the governor of TAVUSH for a little over a year. He was born in TAVUSH and has lived most of his life in TAVUSH. Governor Chobanyan, thank you for joining us at a time when I'm sure you probably had a few other things to do.
Of course. Thank you very much for this
Thank you. I think that we should probably start with a map that doesn't have the provinces marked on it, but that very clearly, well, there are two maps, not this one. If we could start with the other one, yes, the one that first places Armenia in the region. The Karabakh, of course, is right at the center, surrounded in yellow by territories that were taken under Armenian control, at least initially as a security buffer. But Mr. Chobanyan is in TAVUSH, and TAVUSH is up in the northeastern corner of Armenia, kind of where the last A of Armenia is. And we've given you this large map because it's important to see that the state borders of Armenia and Azerbaijan meet right there at TAVUSH, above Lake Sevan. And the teeny border with Georgia is really not the important piece for Mr. Chobanyan. Governor, please tell us, how long is your Armenia-Azerbaijan border at TAVUSH? How long is that border?
Actually, we have about 400 kilometer border, and 50 of these is with Georgia and 350 is with Azerbaijan. Actually, this is the longest border with Azerbaijan. It's almost such in Artsakh.
So 350 kilometers is a little bit under 300 miles, 275 maybe miles. And is that whole border militarized?
Exactly. The whole border is militarized. Of course, now the border is quite calm. There are almost no actions, but the armed forces, as well as the population of TAVUSH, is violently ready for any encroachment by the enemy.
The last time that you were speaking to people around the world explaining the situation of TAVUSH was about 2 months ago now, at the end of July, beginning of August, when there was direct fighting in your villages. What happened after that fighting stopped?
Actually, the activities, the work, I would like to mention that the main goal that I have as a MARSPET, as a governor now in the region, to do everything so that life does not stop and the economy works. We had an extremely difficult year, not only in Armenia, of course, but in the world, but especially in Armenia, because in the epidemic we had July battles, and now we have the war. We understand that the war is not only on the front, but also in the rear. Of course, TAVUSH is not rear just because we have 350 kilometers, but because now the situation is calm, we are considering our region as a rear for a front for Artsakh. We continue the projects we started after July, just after July, in order to straighten and restore the borders and border villages. By the way, we have about 45 border villages from 62 cities and villages what we have in TAVUSH. 45 are border villages. They are just on the border. Fortunately, everything is going good. We have already completed some water and irrigation projects.
Talk about those, please. Talk about the infrastructure, the water irrigation projects, and then we should also talk about roads and transportation because winter's coming.
Exactly. You know, the economy is very important. Actually, this is the most important thing in order to ensure the victory, the peace, what we are considering to have as soon as possible.
Why is that? Why is that important? Why is the economy that important?
Because from one side, we are providing everything based on our economy and our profit. And from other side, we should ensure our victory in the front, in rear, and we should. And the only way to do that is to develop the economy. I mentioned last time that these water and irrigation projects are in the first priority list of our strategy. And I think that this war situation, etc., also connected with water resources.
Explain that, please. What do you mean by water resources? Is it just technical water, just irrigation water?
It's spring water, everything, because 90% of water system of Azerbaijan based on Armenian resources. So our rivers are going to Azerbaijan. In TAVUSH, only in TAVUSH, we have about 450 million cubic meter water resources in year. And from these resources, majority were sending to Azerbaijan. So that's why the water resources and water projects are very important. This is not only economical issue, but also strategic issue, also the security issue.
So
and
are you saying that
yes,
because the water infrastructure developed in the Soviet period is such that water that emanates in Armenia ends up in Azerbaijan, is that a problem for Armenia? Or is that simply the way it is and therefore resources need to be redirected so that there is also sufficient water in TAVUSH?
So the infrastructure is a problem because we didn't develop enough our infrastructure. And the infrastructures what we have in Soviet time are not existing already because of the war, because of again the war in 19th. So now we are recovering the infrastructure, especially for irrigation projects. By the way, in these two months, we completed already some projects, and thanks to our supporters from diaspora, Hrant Foundation, Paros Foundation, Yulia Shakarian, and everybody. So we did already some projects, and some projects are in the progress. Progress. We are doing our best to establish gardens already in this fall for these new irrigated lands. It's very important to ensure high indicators in agriculture and food production, especially because the food security is very important to overcome the crisis of years, even we can say of years, not only this year, but next years. And we believe, and we are doing our best to do that. So
what about
is a critical issue.
What about transportation infrastructure? These are mountainous roads. It's very cold in the northern part of Armenia, and winter is coming. How accessible are the villages and the villagers to security?
The majority proportion of the projects what we have done last 2 years are connecting with the road infrastructure. Now we have quite a big difference between 2 years ago situation and now, especially in TAVUSH, especially in international road system communications, etc. So I think somehow we solved this problem already in these 2 years, and it was priority for us last years, and now we are moving to another infrastructural priorities, which is water and irrigation.
With winter coming, is out-migration still a problem, or is this when migrant laborers will return, and so diminished populations are less of a problem in the winter? What's the situation?
Of course, the situation is quite connecting with the war. It's a big challenge. Of course, the Artsakh war posed new challenges and big challenges, and maybe changes. We can say changes. These are extremely difficult problems that we are solving every day. Of course, some priorities have changed. However, the main task remains to increase the resilience of the communities and the population. the resilience of the population. This refers to security systems, security literacy, economy, social stability, education, etc. So this is our main job, and this job is critical, especially this time during the war and after the war. The whole Armenian people, as you know, is involved in the patriotic war. Everyone tries to participate with the best of their ability in Armenia and out of Armenia. But of course, the participation of the population living in the Republic of Armenia requires huge efforts. Actually, the families are directly connected with the military front in one way or another. In this situation, the efficiency and the effectiveness of the people is naturally full, but I think that we will have enough effort, we will put enough effort to overcome the problems.
Let me ask you a question about numbers. Armenia's tax base remains pretty centralized. So TAVUSH, your budget for all of the programs, projects you've spoken of, comes from the central government or from international sources. Are there any numbers that you can give us as examples? I mean, is there such a thing as your annual budget?
Yes, of course, I can bring the number of 2019, year of 2019. In 2019, all budget, even I can say not a budget, but turnover in the region was about 42 billion, which is about
80 million?
Yes, about that, yes.
It's about $80 million.
Yes, $80 million, including private, public, international sources, etc. Only in infrastructure, in road infrastructure, for example, we invested about 9 billion, which is about $20 million. Of course, international also are participating. It was about $10 million from international sources in 2019, and more or less the same. Or I hope better situation will be this year. But of course, year was crucial, and I think that we cannot ensure that this year will be such a last year. But of course, I would like to let me to explain what I'm thinking about economy and how to overcome these problems, because the numbers, how to even we can have more numbers, but now we don't have enough time for that. This is already the end of the year. We have, as I mentioned, epidemic. We have July battle. We have now the war in Armenia, in Artsakh, and the economy of Armenia must experience rapid development. Not just a development, but rapid development. This is the only way to win, and I would like to explain a little bit how to do it. We should not be afraid to start any business, to enter a new market.
Even in this environment?
Especially in this environment, because we don't have any other chances now. The economic crisis will affect not only Armenia, but the whole world. It means that the demand for the products will be increased extremely all over the world. We must start the great industrialization of the country. The legal regulation of the economy should be based exclusively on economic activity and development. We need fearless, creative people and projects, and we need unconditional support for these projects. It is necessary to create investment funds so that everyone has the opportunity to invest in the homeland, from Armenia and out of Armenia. There should be no such a question whether you have invested or not. The question should be, where did you invest in which sphere or in which company. This is the universal, creative, productive mobilization. This is our biggest issue, but also the biggest opportunity.
Thank you. This is why you're in the position you're in. Thank you very much to Mr. Hayk Chobanyan, who is the governor of the region of TAVUSH in the northeastern corner of Armenia, sharing about a 275, 300 mile border with Azerbaijan directly. I had asked the governor for 15 minutes of his time, and he was very generous with it. Thank you. We will move now to continuing the conversation about infrastructure. Infrastructure, obviously, these questions are all based in the context of, these days, in the context of security and economic infrastructure, social infrastructure. And for that, we're going to speak with Professor Jenny Paturyan, who teaches political science at the American University of Armenia. And not only does she teach, but she's really one of the country's handful of reputable, consistent data scientists, and for that we're grateful. Thank you, Professor Paturyan, for joining us. And to talk with Jenny Paturyan, Emil Sanamyan is going to join us. Emil Sanamyan edits the Focus on Karabakh platform on the University of Southern California Institute of Armenian Studies website. I suggest you all check that out these days. We've spent a great deal of time and resource augmenting that so that all of the official documents, reports, and other data about the conflict are all there for everyone who's asking these days. Emil, as I said, edits that portal. He writes on politics and security in the Caucasus and in the wider neighborhood. Emil was born in then Soviet Baku, and he really is the go-to person for military security and other developments in the region. Emil, welcome back. Jenny, welcome.
Greetings.
Let's talk about social infrastructure. The institutions, civil society, attitudes, both regarding the regions and within the regions. Jenny, you are one of those who has a hand on the studies that are being done, and I suspect your first sentence is going to be, we wish more was being done to study the regions. But let's start with what we've got, especially social infrastructure, especially these days, questions of social cohesion. Is this when, in this teeny country where geography is really such a divider, is this where that becomes a problem for social cohesion, or is the social infrastructure there?
Well, if we speak about Armenia and what is happening inside Armenia, social cohesion is pretty high in general. It's a mono-ethnic country and it's a tiny country. And yes, there are sometimes these conversations about Yerevan versus people in the regions and north and south. But really, I mean, it depends on what you compare with. If you compare it with the United States, to me, United States looks almost dysfunctional in terms of lack of cohesion. Apologies for that, but just comparison. So Armenia, from my point of view, has always had pretty high social cohesion throughout history. But what is happening now is, I wouldn't call it unprecedented, frankly, because I have seen it before, but that's what happens. It's very impressive, very, very impressive. And I've seen it during the earthquake in 1988, and I've seen it during previous wars, and I've seen it during the Velvet Revolution, and we're seeing it now. It's when the people become incredibly united. Volunteering is through the roof, off charts. People are basically out there to support each other, to support the army, to support the refugees. And as I've said, I've seen this kind of mobilizations before at the times of crisis. What is special about this one is that it's been 4 weeks and it doesn't let up. That it's that same mobilization. When, for example, if it's announced that blood donations are needed, it takes several hours for the institution to say, thank you, that's enough. We don't need any, because people just rush in to help. So yes, it's very, very, very high cohesion at the moment. That is something that we have seen before as well in Armenia.
What about urban-rural divide?
It's a little bit hard for me because of the COVID-19, we've all been locked up and isolated. And it's been a while since I've been in regions, so to speak. But there is I don't think it's a divide. I think it's a difference. So rural communities are more, they know each other. Everybody knows each other personally. And so there's more like coming together among friends and relatives. In Yerevan, it's more kind of not humanitarian is not the right word. It's, you don't necessarily know the people you want to volunteer with.
It's a civic sort of response.
Yeah, it's more of a civic, exactly, that's the right word. So while in the regions, it's more of a broader family, even more like, so I think, yes, every region has its own kind of group, its own things happening. But I don't think there is now a divide between Yerevan and the regions.
Emil,
in terms of the war effort.
In terms of the war effort, maybe we come back to that. Emil, we've always talked about how, especially TAVUSH and Goris are really the front lines, because they're really at borders that are either completely non-functional and closed, or quite violent and dangerous the way they are now. What are you hearing, seeing, especially as far as the support to military efforts go, especially in Goris? TAVUSH, ironically, is the place that's quiet these days. But in Goris, how is the civic response and participation? What are you reading? What are you seeing?
Well, certainly Goris until recently was sort of in the rear of Armenia, in the sense that the Azerbaijan was far from Goris. That has changed in the last week. Same for Kapan and Mehri.
All of Sunik, really, that whole province.
Yeah. So TAVUSH was very much on the front lines for many years, and there were periods of time when TAVUSH was intensely attacked by Azerbaijan. That was back in 2015 and also over the summer. And towns of TAVUSH such as Bert and Nuyemberian have come under fire, not to the extent that we're seeing now in Stepanakert, but they did. Like you said, in this particular period, TAVUSH has been sort of conspicuously quiet. There have been attacks on parts of our Republic of Armenia, in Vardenis primarily in the beginning. That's where the road goes from Vardenis to into northern Karabakh.
So we should mention there are two roads, right, that connect Armenia and
several
Karabakh.
roads, but main ones are Vardenis to Mardakert, and in the south it's Goris to Stepanakert. And since the start of this fighting at the end of September, like I said, both Vardenis and Goris and Kapan area have come under attacks, primarily by drones, but also by artillery. So the situation is changing right now in Sunik. Basically, people of Sunik are mobilizing again, just as during the early 90s, creating self-defense units to protect their settlements there. And the situation is in flux in a sense. There are also some things are changing as far as the Russian military presence in that area. As you know, over many years, Russians have had a border post in Mehri and Agarak area along the border with Iran. However, there have been reports that there may have been some redeployments along the sort of the old Armenia-Azerbaijani border between, let's say, Kapan and Zangilan in that area.
So to the east of the Armenian border.
Yes, because we've had Azerbaijani advance through the south of Karabakh in the former Azerbaijani districts there, and they've approached areas close to the former Armenian border, Republic of Armenia border. So Sunik is much more on sort of war footing for the first time in over 20 years, directly in a war footing. The border on the other side has also been quiet with Nakhchivan. There have been only reports of reconnaissance drones, both by Armenia and by Azerbaijan, that they had shot down or shot at reconnaissance drones. And as a matter of fact, today another Israeli drone was shot down over TAVUSH as well. So all of those borders are militarized, Nakhchivan and the border in the north. It appears to me that Russian statements regarding their security guarantees for Republic of Armenia proper have had an effect in the sense that Azerbaijan has not conducted any attacks either so far, ground attacks or any serious artillery attacks either in Tavush or in Nakhchivan border.
I think you should explain that again. You explained it last time, but please explain that again.
Yes, well, we know that Armenia and Russia have a security pact where if Armenia is attacked, Russia is supposed to help. And if Russia attacks, Armenia is supposed to help. Russia is attacked, it's a mutual pact. But Russian government, Vladimir Putin, the leader of Russia, made it clear that this pact only concerns the Republic of Armenia territory, not Artsakh. So by saying that, essentially he said that attacking Republic of Armenia is off limits, and all of this fighting in the past 4 weeks basically primarily focused in Artsakh, all of the shelling and all of the attacks, ground attacks, etc. However, it also constrained Armenian forces on the Armenian side of border, to be able to sort of conduct operations, to be able to relieve forces in Artsakh. So it's gone both ways, basically. Russia appeared to have leaned on both Armenia and Azerbaijan not to extend fighting from outside of Artsakh. But because, like I said, the developments in the south of Artsakh, south of Karabakh, more of Armenia border will be now exposed to attacks. That's Sunik, the Zangezur border, the eastern side of it.
I want to ask about civil society again, Jenny, and Emil too, because at the end of the day, whatever the numbers that we currently have, but we know whatever they are is certainly going to be, if it isn't already, over 1,000. This is, for a country this small, with a population this small, everyone is somehow impacted. And so the social cost of this is going to test everything we just said, the urban-rural divide, taxation, where you put your resources, and of course, social cohesion, civil society coming together, searching for demons, searching for those responsible, searching for answers where there really aren't answers in the face of this kind of loss. Where does civil society, how prepped is it? How able is it? Where does it fit in what is going to come? I want to say next, but I don't think next is too far off. Jenny?
Yeah. Well, when thinking about civil society, I think it's important to distinguish between formal organizations, such as NGOs or groups, and informal, kind of more fluid and more spontaneous things. And in terms of the NGO sector, I just want to share one of the things that I find very sad is that many of those good NGOs were trying to do peace building. And I think they are now under immense pressure to stay quiet, and even most reasonable, humane messages are hard to say in Armenia now, and it's a terrible, terrible loss. And that's something we have to resist. We have to resist losing our souls in this war. We have to, and it's not easy. There are days when I get up feeling so much anger and hate, but we have to resist that. And so that particular sector of civil society is really struggling now, because things like, Azerbaijani civilians have rights too, we need to talk about it. Ironically, thankful. It's the state institutions now that give that message to the people. It's, Artsrun Hovhannisyan, who's the spokesperson for Ministry of Defense, has become my personal hero because the man talks about war, but still talks about values. Like, we don't kill prisoners. We treat them in hospitals because we're human beings. So that's one thing that really, really worries me. All of these NGOs that were trying so hard to have some peace narratives, to have some, these folks are now just really quiet because there's such an anger that it could backlash. So that would be something that we need to think about very seriously. How do we de-radicalize the young people also? I teach at the university and we've got wonderful students. As you said, everyone's impacted. We've lost 6 students already. And some of my courageous students resist the hate narrative, but some give in, and they're young and they're in pain and they're confused and they're angry. And that I worry. I very much worry about this. So,
Emil, do you want to jump in? Because I want to ask about informal structures too.
Yeah, what Jenny's talking about is a very, very important topic, and for us in the diaspora too. Over many years, I've tried to maintain or develop even ties with Azerbaijanis that I find are important people to be connected to, who are honest enough with you, and also are not disconnected from their country's concerns and problems. But yeah, this is a huge challenge to be able to maintain those relationships because war just puts things in very stark terms and the gray zones that were there are shrinking, and it becomes very black and white. And if we return to Armenia and Armenia's body politic and sort of the changes that occurred in Armenia in the last couple of years, we also have to keep in mind that Armenia was in the process of transformation, where the former elite was being slowly or not so slowly sidelined and replaced. And not everywhere, actually. If you remember, there were elections in, I think it was Kajaran, Kapan, where sort of representatives of the former ruling parties managed to get elected as mayors. So I would put that actually question to Jenny also, how that political context is felt in Armenia today, whether there is any coming together between the government and the former government's people, cooperation at the local level. I don't know if you have information directly from Sunik or TAVUSH, but wherever you might have that.
Or Yerevan.
Yeah.
Yerevan is more likely. There have been meetings between the previous presidents and the current government. There have been meetings with all the opposition parties, including extra parliamentary parties, including the Republican Party. But the government is very careful that they don't say what they talk about. Of course, no opposition would be mad enough to say anything against the government right now, because there is again such a rally around the flag. And I think that I hope that they've put their differences aside for the time being. Just yesterday, the leader of one of the big political parties, Hayk Chobanyan, who was arrested on charges of vote buying in the elections, which was a major divide between the ruling government and the biggest opposition party. He was released from custody, and the first thing he said is, "I'm not going to talk about politics now. Our country needs us. I'm there to help." So there is coming together. There is unity. There is the situation is grim, and everybody understands it. So, but I also want to say that the government enjoys even before this, and has enjoyed such an overwhelming support. And thanks God, frankly, every day I think, thanks God, we've got a democratic government we can trust. The Armenian government, from my point of view, has taken its institutionalization even one step further under such a challenge. Perhaps sometimes development happens. They're being quite professional, and the way people trust them, the way nobody worries about these financial transfers to our Armenian fund being stolen. Most people really trust that the government tells us what we need to know, and whatever they don't tell us, yeah, of course, there's Facebook and these emotions about what happened. But by and large, the situation is very different compared to the April War, 2016, that there was such a mistrust of information that came out of the government, and people just not believe that our casualties are X or Y, and everybody was suspicious. So it's a big, big difference now, thanks to the fact that we have a democratic, legitimate government that tries to be as transparent as they possibly can, given the security concerns and the war situation. And obviously they can't tell us everything. Some things need to be.
Jenny, where do we, what we've seen in Armenia over the last certainly 15 years is that social transformations are usually led by the non-formal social forces. They're not the formal institutions and structures. They're not even the formal NGOs. They're the informal gatherings of individuals around a specific issue, working for that specific issue. Is that something that you're seeing at all? Is that something that may be born of this, especially to address the two things that we've mentioned? One is to leave some little space for talk about what peace might mean, and also to talk about how to deal with the loss. And there's going to be huge economic loss that comes at the end of this, which is something we're going to be speaking about next with Hrant Mikaelian as well. But are there these informal movements that you can talk about?
As much as I love informal movements and grassroots, the talk of peace will have to come either from, well, I hesitate to use the word elites, but universities, maybe internationals, because an average Armenian, I think, is just too angry at the moment. But I wanted to tell you something interesting in terms of other transformations. We speak a lot about economy, and what is happening now, there are these informal groups that come together to just do something. There's this let's just do something urge, and they are reinventing what in social science is called social economy, as in doing things for free and sharing them with the community or with the front line. There are bakeries that work nonstop and send the bread for free and say, dear soldiers, when you come back, we'll bake cakes for your weddings. And there's so much volunteer work that there are also successful enterprises being set by people who want to help the Artsakh refugees. I've heard a story about women in Dilajan baking from Karabakh, baking the traditional Karabakh bread with herbs, and that business is so successful, and so on. So these little businesses, they also, of course, people buy because they want to help. The diaspora starts getting involved. It's amazing. I don't know if it will last, but it's a counter narrative to the neoliberal market narrative. It's truly social economy. And my wish is, of course, we need markets that work based on profit logic. I'm not challenging that. But my hope is that would be one thing that might then stay, social enterprises and things like that. And the last thing I want to say also in terms of social transformation, here's a story I heard on the news in one of these bakeries, and this is in Gavar, which is a rather traditional place. The women were saying that even those very strict mothers-in-law that don't allow their daughters-in-law to go out of the house now are asking to get their daughters-in-law involved. So those kind of very traditional restrictive barriers are being broken.
It only took a war,
the stereotype, yeah, it only took a war. The woman's role is changing, women warriors on the front line, women leaders. Of course, women are performing all the traditional roles as well of cooking and sewing and clothes. But there is I wonder if this is something we can then use, I hope, because we need that.
Well, thank you for making us smile. Thank you, Jenny Paturyan.
There are also jokes, by the way, There are also
already?
anecdotes about the war already. Yes.
Okay,
Believe
share
it or
one,
not,
please.
there are.
Would you share one? Are you a joke teller?
Yeah, sure. Let me think about which one. So one joke is that the Armenian forces had captured so many tanks from the Azerbaijanis that in Stepanakert, if you call the local equivalent of Uber taxi, a tank comes. So that's one joke. Another one is about, what else is there? Yeah, another one is about, this daily briefings by the Ministry of Defense. I told you Artun Hovhannisyan has become everybody's hero and my personal hero. So the joke is like this. Erdogan calls Aliyev and says, so how's the war going? Do you have too many casualties? And Aliyev says, I don't know. I'm waiting for Artun Hovhannisyan to post it. And there are a few more, but sort of those kinds of jokes.
We may come back to you at the end of this series because we may need, actually, we'll just invite you every week to just give us a couple of new ones because we can all use this. Thank you, Jenny. That was great. Jenny Paturyan is a professor of political science. I think she might move to anthropology or other things soon at this rate. And we're going to invite Hrant Mikaelian to join us. He's going to have a tough act to follow. Maybe we'll ask him for a joke or two because it means a lot that the society is already articulating all of these feelings. Hrant is with the Caucasus Institute. He's an analyst at the Caucasus Institute in Yerevan. He is a Georgian Armenian. And when we began to search for a political economist to talk with us today, all roads led to Hrant Mikaelian. So welcome, Hrant.
Hello. Thanks for having me here.
We're happy you're here. I'm sorry this is what we're going to be talking about, however. Hrant, you heard the conversation. We've been talking about social cohesion, social infrastructure, social transformations, but let's talk about the economics of security and of war. And this is where Emil will take over from me because these are the numbers he lives with. But really, I think we kind of need to understand how economic development in Armenia has gone in parallel with military development, kind of. Although now at the beginning of the war, we found that there are lots of things we didn't have that, the Armenian side thinks it should have had. So there's economic development that got us to this point, and now there's a war that has huge economic cost, and then we have to work ourselves out of this place. So that's kind of the arc I'd like to talk about. Maybe if we talk a little bit about the economic processes that brought us here, economy, prosperity, military, and then move from there?
Okay. First of all, I will try to take a brief look at how economy and politics are interconnected. In opinion of many, especially in view of Marxism, the economy was primary, and the politics was secondary. So if somewhere there is an economic interest, then politics comes to describe the economic interest in political terms. What I've been observing as a simultaneously political scientist and economist is that its political situation which almost always shapes the reality, and when it comes to political issues of big importance, politicians usually make decisions in favor of political line, not for economy. Of course, we observe that a lot in our region as well. And the first thing which we can observe is a blockade of Armenia by Azerbaijan and Turkey, and now since 2021, Armenia has also imposed will also impose the embargo on Turkish goods
in 2021.
and also since January 1st, and also we've seen embargo on Turkish goods from, for example, Saudi side and some other countries, and then there is embargo on Armenian goods in Azerbaijan and Turkey, and more we see these divisive lines, of course, and also we see a lot of that around Russia. So if we look at every of those decisions, it was always harming the economy, both in country which is adopting these sanctions and the country which is, let's say, victim or purpose of the sanctions. Of course, the country which imposes sanctions, the effect is lower, but still it is there. Now,
you're saying
concerning Armenia,
you're saying sanctioning or forbidding the entry of Turkish goods into Armenia will be harder on Armenia?
No, if Turkey forbids entrance of Armenian goods to Turkey, it's harder for Armenia. If Armenia is forbidding entrance of Turkish goods, it's already harder for Turkey. But still, it's not beneficial for any of the countries, because in the zero-sum game, the one which imposes sanctions or economic restrictions is the winner. If we look at it in the plus-sum game or positive-sum game, let's say, then of course generally both sides lose. Now, the last 25 years, I would say, in the world we have observed generally when it was a time when economic logic was still prevailing in majority of the cases, although we have seen a lot of cases where politics was also important, but still economy was dominant. But last 5 years we see more and more of that in when economy gets less and less important, more sanctions. Especially this is visible during this coronavirus crisis, and
Hrant, I
we
want
see
to
that
bring you up.
big
I want to bring you up to Armenia in the last 2, 3, 5 years and talk about how political choices, how economic choices impacted the politics and security, and the reverse.
Okay. Now, during all this military situation, political situation, logistics, Armenia had to adapt to it economically. It was hard because Armenia does not have access to the sea and to major trade routes, but still it was able, and as of now, Armenia has more or less equal to Georgia GDP per capita, or to Ukraine and to Moldova, so it's more or less the same income group. So it has adapted somehow, but of course it's very vulnerable if we compare it to these countries, because the number of roads through which it might be supplied and it might trade, it's much lower. Also, it's important that institutional development is affected by the war. And here is an interesting fact. It's that since the country needs, especially when we are talking about Armenia, but generally all Caucasus countries which are involved in political and military conflicts, they have to develop more effectively than their counterparts in post-Soviet space to attract resources to the political needs. So generally, Armenia had to implement a lot of political and institutional reforms. And if we look at doing business or some other rankings, economic freedom, we would see Armenia much higher than than we would expect given its income group.
Since you were talking about the economy in the context of trade, if those two borders remain closed, Turkey and Azerbaijan, that leaves Iran and Georgia, as it always has. Can we assume that Georgia will continue to be the open road, or do we worry that what Georgia has been doing during these last couple of weeks, and maybe I'll ask Emil to talk about that real briefly before you answer, what Georgia's position has been given the military context, and then let's see what that is going to mean for Armenia in the economic context. Emil, what do you think?
If I say just a few words about Georgia's position here, I mean, I can't say I followed it very attentively, but clearly we have two sets of issues here. Georgia has an unresolved conflict with Russia. That means that Russian military aircraft cannot fly over Georgia into Armenia or anywhere else, so they fly around Georgia. Georgia and Turkey and Azerbaijan have military cooperation, have security cooperation, particularly related to the pipeline. So when the Georgian government came out and said that they will no longer allow military cargoes to transit Georgian airspace because of the war in Karabakh, it really just applied to Armenia. And basically they've imposed an embargo on military goods, even the Armenian transported military goods coming into Armenia via Georgia, while cargo planes with ammunition and mercenaries continue to fly from Turkey into Azerbaijan, and also from Israel via Turkey and over Georgia and into Azerbaijan. So that's been for a long time this unequal relationship between Georgia and Armenia, in the sense that Georgia is more important as a transit area for Armenian goods than Armenia is for Georgia, obviously.
So in that context, Hrant, what would it take for Armenia's trade routes to also be closed? I mean, if a third country if Turkey, the third country, can attack with drones, why can't Turkey, the third country, also impose on Georgia that even economic trade through Georgia to Armenia should be disallowed?
After all that, which Emil has told us, Georgia still struggles to keep as much neutral as possible. It is highly dependent on Turkey and Azerbaijan. But if we compare it to the war of beginning of the 90s, now Georgia is stronger institutionally and is still able to maintain more control over its territory. So Georgia is not willing to completely stand on one of the sides. And I think until Georgian state is strong enough, as it is at least now, it will not allow completely to, let's say, one-sided situation on its side. So I think yet Armenia has a good opportunity to talk to Georgia. Of course, Armenia has to develop its offer to Georgia as well, maybe in terms of trade or maybe somewhere else, but still I think at least in economic terms it's not that bad. So both Georgian and Iranian roads are open for trade. It's a bit complicated given the global crisis right now and the closed borders, but still it's not that Armenia will lose these roads.
How are we going to cost out the economic damage of this war? When can you start looking at those numbers and just do a simple numerical analysis and say, this is what this war cost us economically?
If I could expand on that question, I actually had something similar in mind for Hrant. Hrant, you looked at the first Karabakh war and the casualties that the Armenian side had and the cost of it. If you could talk about, obviously, the most expensive thing in the world is human life, and this has been very costly endeavor so far, and already comparable to Armenian losses in the early 90s. How did the losses, demographic losses, accumulated because of the war of the early 90s, and what's happening today? How that's comparable? I also wanted to talk about the economic cost more generally. So are we observing any capital flight from Armenia because of the war, or are we also observing maybe some emergency investments from abroad into Armenia because of what's happened.
Let's do the first one
sorry,
first. The comparison.
Can you repeat the second?
We'll get to the second one in a minute. Talk a little bit about the first.
Okay, if we talk about human lives losses, what we observe now is terrific. Of course, there are different estimates. There is an official number of 900 plus, and there is an expectation that some people who are not yet recognized will also be recognized, and we will have the numbers bigger. So the losses, as what we can assume that we had already by now, are terrific. Because
this is just on the Armenian side.
It's on Armenian side. We don't know yet exactly Azeri losses because it is forbidden to talk about that in Azerbaijan by the law of September of 2014. So we don't even know the losses of Azerbaijan in 2016. So now it's very hard to estimate what exact losses Azerbaijan can have. But I think for Azerbaijan it's also hurting, and BBC had an article about that. Now concerning Armenia, given that the generation which was born in 2000 to 2002 is the smallest generation. It was post-Soviet economic decadence, and demographically we had lowest birth rate exactly in those years. The loss is even more significant in this term, and we can multiply, let's say, by factor of 1.5 or 2 to see how much kids will not be born, and then social capital, and then expenses on people who are wounded, and many of them will need to take care until the end of their life, and then a lot of education expenses which have been spent, and that's also a big expense. Now, except for the soldiers, we see refugees in Yerevan and in all over Armenia. I cannot say about numbers exactly, although there are very strong estimates and registration data which is not public, but so far they are rather big, and hopefully they will be able to go back. But given the experience of 90s, we know that not all of them will do that, especially now if people perceive their place of inhabitance as not secure, especially, let's say, Hadrut. Then migration. After every war, we see the out-migration wave. We don't know how it will go after this war, because the borders are closed yet and so on, but generally sense of security will decrease. And I have an econometric model which makes based on which I can try to predict the migration numbers. And one of the big predictors is also peace situation in the country and in the region as well. So generally, we can expect that big out-migration wave will also lead this war, and it will not be during 1 year, but it will be more long-term, let's say. And that is also human capital loss and also a demographic loss. So we will have multidimensional losses on social side, on economic side, for example, less investment. I don't want to be very pessimistic, but there are more than 20 points which I've figured out which will, let's say, combine whole economic direct and indirect losses now and in the future. But the list is very long, and of course it's very problematic. Also, we will have to recover, and
Go on.
Yeah. Also, we will have to recover, invest into the infrastructure, try to make new paths to development, and that will be also costly. And of course, Armenia will need external resources. What will be there? It's hard to say now.
About external resources, that was Emil's second question. that do we have a read yet on how that's impacting investors right now? Is there investment flight? Is there capital flight? Or are new people coming in intentionally?
Well, situation was pessimistic already before the war. After April 2016, there was virtually no incoming investment to Armenia. Very few. It was about 2% of GDP annually, and I think it will be even worse since now. And also, we should take into account that majority of the capital which let's say was very liquid has already left Armenia because of this context. So I don't expect big capital loss, although I might be wrong, because if, let's say, I don't expect foreign capital loss because it's already few here, but if we will have local capital loss, that will be even more problematic. So I'm afraid that it will affect also property market. That we will see in, let's say, a couple of months. So I'm also expecting to see economic statistics. First portion we will have in 2 days, in Monday's morning. It will be for September, but I would rather wait until the end of the year at least, and maybe beginning of the next year, to see first impact of the crisis. Now, concerning external effects, they are multidimensional. For example, if Armenia wants to get a loan externally, the percentages will be higher. They are already higher than it would be if we look at Armenian economic characteristics, because the inflation rate is low, economy is stable, but still they are higher than we.
You mean if the IMF,
now it will be even
if the IMF or the European Bank, you mean if the international financial institutions were to offer Armenia a loan?
I mean private investors, because IMF and European Bank and generally these international institutions are still political entities. They might decide to aid Armenia. This is not excluded, and they might aid Armenia with good offers if they do. But if Armenia wants to get a loan on the market from private sources, that will be much harder than it was. And already we've seen, if I'm not mistaken, on October 6th, Fitch has decreased Armenian credit ranking from BB minus to B plus, or to B plus or just B, if I'm not mistaken. Should check. But anyway, already after 1 week of war, Armenia's credit ranking has decreased, which is directly interconnected with the war.
I'm going to ask both of you a question that is probably ill-timed, but heck, if we're going to think about peace, are there economic arenas, opportunities, areas, possibilities that might be connectors between Armenians and Azerbaijan that would require international support, participation, investment, something, so that there's a carrot that can be dangled, so that there is some movement towards some sort of collaboration and interdependence. Now, I know my question is dumb, and I know it's ill-timed. I mean, if we weren't able to do this 2 years ago, 4 years ago, 6 years ago, when we weren't killing each other, is this a time to even ask the question? But I'm asking.
Well, this was much more relevant back in the 90s, after the First War, when both countries were basically in economic doldrums after the Soviet dissolution. and the notion that peaceful resolution would bring about international investments and basically make things better beyond just not having a threat of war was much more credible at the time. 2.5 decades have passed since then. Both countries have adjusted to the life with not having relations with each other. So for something to be beyond political constraints, for those things to get naturalized economically, you would really need to basically redraw the map of the whole region, which I don't think is going to happen in any foreseeable future. What we do have is what maybe Hrant could also elucidate on, is we actually we obviously know that Azerbaijan is an oil gas economy, and was this war primarily is made possible by the oil revenue that Azerbaijan has accumulated. But beyond that, its economic development has been very narrow. Beyond sort of Baku oil and the pipeline network, GDP per capita and incomes are, as a matter of fact, have been lower than in average Armenia. So if maybe Hrant could elucidate a little bit about that in terms of what segments of the Armenian economy will be most hard hit and the ones that are most likely to survive this upheaval. And I don't know if you want to talk about Azerbaijan, but probably more difficult to talk about that, but maybe in comparison to Azerbaijan.
Okay, I'll start from the end. What segments of economy? First of all, I expect finance to be hit most. Government finance, corporate finance, and private finance. Especially private, because if we look at the generally 2020, people started spending their money which they have gathered before because of the crisis, and crisis hit Armenia rather hard. Let's say in August the economic decline was minus 10%, so it was rather big. People already have spent a significant portion of the money they had, and now some of people might lose jobs. There are social activity indicators daily, which indicate that daily activity in Yerevan has decreased by, let's say, 25 to 30%. I mean, people who get out of their homes, more and more people don't do that.
This is COVID-based or war-related?
Generally war-related, because right before the war, daily activity was growing. It, of course, the biggest impact generally in 2020 was by the COVID and lockdowns. Then it started recovering, and it was recovering right until September 26. Now, since September 26, it started decreasing, and it continues decreasing even now. So it will, of course, affect economy, affect services economy, and affect consumption in midterm. So finance, consumption, services, those are the sectors which are going to be hit hardest. Now, concerning Azerbaijan, I completely agree with what Emil said. It is that Azerbaijani non-oil gas economy is very poor, and Azerbaijani non-oil gas exports is smaller than Armenian exports, although Azerbaijan's population is bigger. So Azerbaijan has little to offer outside its oil and gas sector. So if it wants, in reality, if it wants to develop more naturally, let's say, Armenian market would be good for it, and also for Armenia, Azeri market would be beneficial, of course, and also transportation and other issues. Of course, it is, as you said, it is hard to talk about it now, but I was always insisting that first all borders should be open, because if there is no trust between peoples, if there is no connection between peoples, and if there is no mutual interest, we will only have possibility of military solution of the issue. So I think the first, the second, and the 10th thing which we should do is opening the borders and trade. Now,
I can't think of a better place to stop and say thank you. We are out of time,
okay.
and truly, I mean, at the end of the day, it is those kinds of questions that we're all going to have to ask ourselves throughout the world, Armenians, Azerbaijanis, the international community. So I do want to thank you, Hrant Mikaelian, Emil Sanamyan, of course, and Jenny Paturyan for joining us. I also want to thank Hayk Chobanyan, the governor of TAVUSH, for joining us on today's program. Thank you all. I want to say that we have somehow modified the topics of conversation for our next 2 weeks. And in fact, where Hrant Mikaelian just left off is kind of where we're going to go. Next week, we're going to be speaking about this international community that we all speak of. Who are they? Is it the international organizations? Is it countries? Is it NGOs? Is it the media? Who are they, and what is their role in this, in bringing this conflict to some sort of resolution, temporary as well as long-term? And the final week, we're going to be speaking about the roads to peace. And in fact, again, the order in which the 4 major issues that confront this conflict and those who want to try to resolve it are those borders, refugees, all of the territories that are under Armenian control that are not part of Karabakh proper, and of course the status of Karabakh itself. So those are the issues we'll be talking about in the next 2 weeks. I want to thank you for joining us. I hope that you will share these recordings. They're available as video on YouTube, Facebook, and of course the Institute's page. They're also available as audio as part of the Institute's Unpacking Armenian Studies podcast. In addition, again, focus on Karabakh on the Institute's armenian.usc.edu page is full of material that can be read, misunderstood, reread, partially understood, and shared so that we can come to some common understanding of the challenges. And hopefully next week we will not be talking about bombing of civilians or the military anywhere along this line of contact. Thank you for joining us at the Institute of Armenian Studies at USC.